And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is October the 13th, 286th day of the year. Just 79 days remain to the year's over with, and we'll start a new year. Holidays observances. Well, not getting cooperation. There we go. Well, it's National Train Your Brain Day. It's recommended you do a crossword puzzle or study a foreign language. Try your hand at some logic puzzles. Helps keep your brain sharp and improve your mind. National No Bra Day. Free yourself from constraints and go braless to help raise awareness about breast cancer and give folks a thrill. National M&M Day. National Heritage Day in the Turks and Caicos Islands. Disaster Day. International Day for Failure. National Kick Butt Day. Bra Day USA. And a National Skeptics Day. It's recommended you question everything. It's the compass that guides us through a world brimming with information. Helps navigate a sea of ideas. World Thrombosis Day. Navy Day. Herpes Awareness Day. National Online Bank Day. Celebrate Metastatic Breast Cancer Awareness Day. National Transfer Your Money to Your Son Day. Bestow a gesture of familiar love and support. It's a heartfelt token, ensuring your son's well-being and aspirations are nurtured. Indigenous Peoples Day. Canadian Day. It's also Columbus Day. Though he's a controversial figure, there's no denying he was important in the history of America. National School Lunch Week. Seed Gathering Season. Red Valley. Anti-Poverty Week. Donate money to a homeless person. Baby Loss Awareness Week. Truffle Days in Croatia. Oktoberfest in Blumenau. Hemophilia Awareness Week. Recycle Awareness Week. Drink Local Wine Week. National Collegiate Alcohol Awareness Week. Hispanic Heritage Month. And UK Coffee Week. Famous people born on this day. Best known bartender in the country, Alexia Ocasio-Cortez. Tiffany Trump. Kelly Preston. Paul Simon. Brie Osmond. And Jerry Rice. Well, on that note, let's see what stories we have in the news. There's always something going on. Well, President Trump is applauding peace. He says it's a historic dawn of a new Middle East, thanks to the treaty between Hamas and Israel. The President Trump has written a message to Israelis after all living hostages were released by Hamas. They were freed from captivity this morning. The hostage for prisoner exchange between Israel and Hamas began about 8 o'clock on Monday morning as the Red Cross convoys made their way through Gaza to bring hostages home and Palestinian prisoners. Israel released about 2,000 Palestinians, including 250 well-known terrorists. President Trump arrived in Israel this morning, where he's making a historic address to Israeli parliament, the Knesset. Israel's President Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the Knesset and remarked that Trump is the greatest friend the state of Israel's ever had in the White House. Later on, President Trump's going to visit Egypt to participate in the Middle East peace ceremony. Let's just hope it lasts this time. Well, dozens were killed in Gaza as violence erupts between Hamas and local militias. or as they're called there, armed clans. There was violent fighting yesterday and within hours of the expected release of hostages in the war-torn region. Clashes took place between local militias. Also came ahead of a televised address in which Prime Minister Netanyahu called the imminent hostage release the beginning of a new path. He also said the campaign is not over. There's still very great security challenges ahead of us. Locals said the gunfire sent families fleeing in panic. Let's see. Well, more than 30 children were rescued during trafficking operations in a major U.S. city. Federal and local authorities rescued more than 30 and covered multiple trafficking operations targeting vulnerable youth during a coordinated crackdown across Texas. This effort was centered around San Antonio, led to arrest and felony warrants and several new investigations under a joint mission known as Operation Lightning Bug. Teams from the U.S. Marshal Service out of San Antonio, Del Rio, Midland, and Pecos joined forces with the San Antonio Police Department Missing Persons Unit, the Special Victims Unit, Street Crimes Unit, and Covert Operations. And together they combed through Texas and national crime databases to identify at-risk juveniles and coordinate recovery efforts. What happened? There we go. The results included 3 arrests for harboring runaways, 9 felony warrants being executed, 6 sex trafficking survivors rescued and connected with support services, 5 new trafficking investigations opened up, more than 30 missing juveniles located, more than 120 additional juveniles voluntarily returned home, clearing their names from missing person databases. Each recovered child, of course, was interviewed by the San Antonio Police Department Special Victims Unit to determine whether they had been victimized. Survivors are referred to support services provided by agencies such as Health and Human Services to ensure long-term care and protection. The protecting children remains central to the U.S. Marshal Service's mission, according to U.S. Marshal Susan Permerleo for the Western District of Texas. Well, sitting here on the border, there's always something going on regarding trafficking, whether it's of minors or of undocumented immigrants. Well, Pam Bondi responds to Saturday Night Live parody of herself and Christy Noem. In fact, she gave a playful response to actress Amy Poehler's parody of her on NBC Saturday Night, or Saturday Night Live, SNL. Poehler, who hosted Saturday's episode, appeared in the cold open as Pam Bondi during her testimony at a Senate Judiciary Committee oversight hearing last week. She said, "My name is Pam Bondi. I spell it with an I because I ain't going to answer any of your questions." She said, "My time is valuable. The DOJ has many ongoing operations. We're moving like Kash Patel's eyeballs very quickly in multiple directions at once." Well, she was later joined by her former SNL cast member Tina Fey, who played Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, carrying an AR-15 rifle. I guess they have to have something to make fun of, usually something they don't understand. Well, President Trump is considering Tomahawk deliveries to Ukraine if Russia keeps the war going. He said he'll send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine if Russian President Vladimir Putin doesn't settle the war, calling the weapon incredible and very offensive. He was talking to reporters on board Air Force One on Sunday night. He was asked about his recent conversation with Zelensky and about the military aid that's going to be furnished. He said he spoke with Zelensky on Sunday morning, and Zelensky asked about Ukraine's need for additional weapons in its fight against Russia. He said the U.S. sells and sends weapons to NATO, unlike the Biden administration, which he said gave Ukraine $350 billion. He said, "We gave him nothing. We gave him respect and some other things." Says he hoped the U.S. can provide more arms, and added the country must also keep enough to defend itself. He said he needed the Patriots very badly. He'd like to have Tomahawks. That's a step up. We talked about that, so we'll see. Well, I got everything acting kind of odd this morning. Well, let's see. As I said earlier, this is Columbus Day, though the left wants to call it Aboriginal Peoples Day. Well, Justin Trudeau has been caught in a steamy embrace with pop star Katy Perry. The photos were obtained by Fox News. The couple was spotted sharing some PDA while aboard Perry's yacht, the Caravel, off the coast of Santa Barbara last week. In one particular frame, the former Canadian Prime Minister is seen kissing the pop star's cheek while pulling her in close for another hug. In another frame, Perry is wearing a dark-colored swimsuit, cozied up to Trudeau as the 53-year-old Canadian Prime Minister placed his hand on her rear end. Representative for Perry didn't immediately respond to Fox News' request for comment. Trudeau's always starting something, kind of like the motto of a battery company I'm familiar with. Well, Diane Keaton's final moments were revealed in a heart-wrenching 911 radio dispatch. According to the 911 audio obtained by TMZ, a dispatch revealed there was a person down in the early hours of Saturday morning, and then gave the actress's address. Outlet reported Keaton was transported to a local hospital by the Los Angeles Fire Department. She died at the age of 79, according to what her family told to People magazine. Close friend of the Hollywood icon told the outlet Keaton's health had been rapidly declining recently. She declined very suddenly, which was heartbreaking for everybody who loved her, according to a friend of the Oscar winner. So unexpected, especially for somebody who had such strength and spirit. In her final months, she was surrounded only by her closest family, who chose to keep things private. Even longtime friends weren't fully aware of what was happening, according to a family member. The Grammy and Oscar winning songwriter Carol Sager talked about her visit with Keaton just weeks before her death. Said she saw her 2 or 3 weeks ago and she's very thin. Well, end of an era. J.D. Vance is accusing NBC of failing to cover the Israeli cheering for Trump and securing the peace deal. He criticized NBC News Sunday morning, accusing the network of ignoring Israelis celebrating President Trump's role in securing the peace deal between Israel and Hamas. He was talking to Meet the Press. Said he watched NBC's coverage showing demonstrators in Israel booing while Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's name was mentioned at a rally, and failed to note the crowd cheered when Trump's name came up, which is typical of how our media is dealing with this administration. Diddy eyes an easy time at Fort Dix prison, but former inmate Joe Giudice warns of violence and gangs. Combs' legal team is requesting their trial be sent to Fort Dix's residential drug abuse program to serve his sentence. Former Royal Housewives New Jersey star Joe Giudice, who served his own prison sentence at the New Jersey facilities, and his lawyer, James Leonard Jr., told Fox News Digital what Combs can expect. He was sentenced to 15 months in prison on federal prostitution charges earlier this month. Giudice served his sentence for conspiracy, bankruptcy, fraud, and tax offenses at Fort Dix from 2016 to 2019. It's a federal correctional facility in Fort Dix, New Jersey. Combs' lawyer, Penny Garagos, filed a letter on October 6 asking that Judge Subramanian asked the Bureau of Prisons to suggest Fort Dix for her client. In this letter, Garagos said that Coombs would be able to address drug abuse issues and maximize family visitation and rehabilitative efforts at the prisons because of its programs. He also explained it's a highly sought-after program by eligible prisoners and one of the few facilities in the Bureau of Prisons that offers a residential drug abuse program. Yes, let's take care of the man who abused so many others. Well, the unexplained mass shootings are continuing. This shooting took place at a crowded South Carolina bar, left behind 4 dead and 20 others injured. Took place early Sunday morning when gunfire erupted during a crowded gathering at a bar in St. Helena Island in South Carolina. Beaufort County Sheriff's Office said deputies responded to reports of a shooting about 1 o'clock in the morning at Willie's Bar and Grill on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. When police arrived, they found a large crowd of people, several of whom had sustained gunshot wounds. Preliminary investigation found hundreds of people at the bar when gunfire broke out, sending victims and witnesses scrambling for safety in nearby businesses and homes. Sheriff's Office said the Beaufort County Emergency Medical Services transported several victims to nearby hospitals. Others continued to arrive on their own, seeking treatment for injuries suffered in the shooting. In all, 20 people were injured in the shooting. 4 were taken to hospitals in critical condition. 4 others were pronounced dead at the scene. Law enforcement officials haven't yet released the names of those who died during the shooting. Well, been an assault on Columbus statues, which has sparked Italian-American groups to band together and fight back. 5 years after statues of Italian explorer Columbus were toppled, beheaded, and otherwise vandalized across America in the name of social justice, issues once again been raised before Columbus Day holiday. Socialist New York City mayoral candidate Zoran Mondami has been battling through many extreme viewpoints he's shared in the past, including about the Italian man who discovered America. A resurfaced photo from his X account from June of 2020 showed the candidate's hand in the foreground flipping off a statue of Columbus, which stood in the background. Post caption said, "Take it down." One group in standing for it has been working to further the interest of Italian Americans in the years following the assault on Columbus's statues. According to Basil Russo, and what he said to Fox News, "I think Mondami should be ashamed of himself because the position he's assuming is very hurtful and detrimental to the Italian American community. He is the president of the Conference of Presidents of Major Italian American Organizations, a conglomerate established to unify Italian American groups to stand for their own interest." Well, there have been a number of anti-ICE protests that have turned violent in Illinois, and 4 people have been arrested. Well, President Trump has said don't worry about China after Beijing responds to the 100% tariff threat. He moved to calm the trade war fears following Beijing's defiant response to rare earth export restrictions. Siwa fights to save New York City from Fear City comeback as residents are leaving. He's warned that New York City is turning into an Escape from New York sequel amid rising crime and high taxes. He trails in the polls with 15% support behind Mondami and Cuomo. According to the Republican mayoral hopeful, it's Escape from New York all over again. He warns of progressive mismanagement, high taxes, and rising crimes, turning the nation's largest city into a cautionary tale. We lived there for 3 years. I would not go back with what's taking place now. Well, there was a 60 Minutes segment that compares Trump's economy to 1929 stock crash. Claims CEOs are too nervous to speak out. This segment of CBS's 60 Minutes Sunday night suggested record high stock market levels under President Trump could be a precursor to another crash similar to 1929. Leslie Stahl spoke with CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin about his upcoming book, 1929. It explores the economic and social buildup to the 29 stock market crash. He claimed the U.S. today was in another roaring 20s period, with the market climbing for months before what became a historic downturn. Well, experts are warning that a popular vitamin D supplement have an unexpected effect. The more potent and longer-lasting form, vitamin D3, is produced naturally when the body is exposed to sunlight. It's also found in animal products. Vitamin D2 comes from plant or fungal sources, according to the National Institutes of Health. And researchers from the University of Surrey in the UK found that taking vitamin D2 can cause reduced levels of vitamin D3 in the body. They made this determination by analyzing 11 randomized controlled trials, including 655 adults, which showed that people taking vitamin D2 supplements had less vitamin D3 than those who didn't take vitamin D2. The findings of the study, conducted along with the John Innes Center and the Quadram Institute of Bioscience in Norwich, England, were published in the journal Nutrition Reviews. Well, J.P. Morgan Chase has announced a $1.5 trillion initiative to fortify key U.S. industries. So at least somebody's doing something. Well, the feds have now proven the Palisades fire in California was preventable. Newsom and Bass now have nowhere to hide and questions they're going to have to answer. Trump administration's Department of Justice and Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, also known as ATF, announced it determined the cause of the Pacific Palisades fire and arrested an alleged arsonist. Previously, local officials claimed the cause was unknown but may have been caused by fireworks. A lot of folks who live in the Palisades don't think enough has been done up to this point. Charlie Sheen opens up about living in his famous brother's shadow. Emilio Estevez was part of the Brat Pack. Sheen said he felt like a valet during that time period. Courtney Stoddard slams child marriage laws. She got married to Doug Hutchinson at the age of 16. And now is saying that was not a good thing. Well, scientists have cracked the code on how dietary fiber shields your body from harmful sugar damage. This new UC Irvine study uncovered how dietary fiber protects the body from sugar's damage and how protecting yourself starts in the gut. Researchers found that inulin, naturally occurring fiber found in vegetables like onions and garlic and artichokes, can reshape the bacteria living in your gut to stop fructose before it hits your liver. Well, let's see. Las Vegas visitors cite rising prices as tourism dips. We had a timeshare and used to go periodically. And after we did away with the timeshare, it appeared that the price had just went through the roof. Well, let's see. Former British Prime Minister's 100th birthday shows how true diplomacy shaped history. Margaret Thatcher at 100. An occasion that brings together leaders and supporters from across the Atlantic to pay tribute to her life. The Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher worked together to make some very positive changes. Well, on that note, we're going to end our news segment and talk about our main topic today. We're going to be talking about ghost stories that have come to light. You know, there's been a lot of stories that I've heard about various aspects. of ghosts and hauntings. In spite of naysayers, there's been quite a paranormal upsurge over the last, I guess, 15 or 20 years. And this first story is typical of things that have been reported. There was a lady who reported that her son continued to say there was something scary in his closet. He wanted to sleep with the light on in his bedroom. Didn't want anybody to look in the closet. Now, I grew up in a house. The original part was built in 1815. And I was always seeing and hearing strange things. And I was assured that I was just crazy by my grandmother. It was actually her house. And I had, it was one particular closet. I knew there was something in it. And later on, I discovered that in the back of that closet, hidden by clothes, there was a ladder. Now, this was a 2-story antebellum home. And that ladder went through a trap door all the way up to the roof. Very easily, something could have come down that ladder. In this particular case, this mother looked in the closet and didn't see anything. She always left the light on like he asked, and after he fell asleep, she'd go back in and turn the light off. One night at about 1 o'clock in the morning, her son woke up crying and came into her bedroom where she and her husband were sleeping. He said, "This creepy thing's in my closet." She got out of bed and went into his room and looked in the closet. Didn't see anything, but she did find encounter a very unusual chill. Well, the son wouldn't go back to his own bed. His younger brother was now afraid, claiming he too had seen the creepy thing. Both boys asked if they could sleep with the parents, and the mother said, "Well, let's camp out in the living room," and that's what everybody did. Well, when the husband got up to go to work at 3:30 in the morning, he complained that this was happening too many nights and something needed to be done, and she agreed. Now, it didn't happen every night, but the rate in which it was happening was increasing. A few nights later, she put the boys to bed, and before she turned off the light, she faced that closet, commanded the thing, the demon or whatever it might be, to come out and leave in Jesus' name. Now, the mother had left the window open just a little bit, and she and the 2 boys heard a sound in response to what she said. A creepy voice said, "No." And they had the impression it had gone out the window. Well, she continued to pray and ask God to send his angels to protect the boys. Next day, she walked the property line and prayed again. And since that night, there hadn't been any more problems. The sons both claimed they see big men that are shiny. Both sons said they felt very safe and now they could sleep. And she prayed, but was reassured they were from God. Well, we don't understand the paranormal. And I've had a lot of people tell me a lot of very strange stories about things such as this. Well, this next story happened in Maine. The person telling the story didn't have it happen to them. It happened to their cousin. And she lived in an old orchard beach in a little farmhouse with her 3 daughters. The house they lived in was built on an older foundation because the original house had burned up in the years before. And the father of the family who lived in the original house at the time was only able to save one of his sons. Went back inside to get his wife and the other children. It was his parents who lived with him, but the house fell in on him. Everyone but the son who'd already been rescued died in that fire. Well, the son survived and was raised by his other grandparents, graduated high school and got a job. And he was working, but he was dealing with a lot of unresolved issues. As an adult, the surviving son was living in the old house, which his grandparents had bought and renovated. And one night he decided he was going to commit suicide. May have been survivor's guilt. We don't really know. Shot himself in the living room area. Anyway, after the storyteller's cousin, we'll call her Barbara, moved in with her 3 daughters, they could hear noises late at night. Once one of the daughters had friends over and they were making a lot of noise, and the young man's ghost started pounding on the wall, telling him to be quiet. Quite often he would do this if things got noisy. Well, one time the cousin saw a young man walking across her front yard. And it was without a doubt the ghost of the young man who had taken his own life in that house. The only one who survived the horrific house fire that took place years before. Well, the cousin got some sage to sage the house, which many say does away with evil spirits and negative energy. But it disappeared before she could get that done. And the storyteller also had a couple of experiences in that haunted house. She was invited there once, and while they were sitting at the kitchen table, she looked out the back window and saw a black ribbon floating in the air. It just floated there, and she thought it might be a bird who's building a nest. Another time, a little bell attached to a purse she had at the time started jingling while she was sleeping in the living room on the couch. She heard it jingle a bit, and that was the extent of her ghostly experiences. Well, the cousin and her daughters no longer live there, but it's a place they're going to remember for the rest of their lives. They wouldn't talk about all the experiences they encountered, but apparently it was changed their attitude about the paranormal. Well, there's another story told by the music minister at a particular church. Now, the music minister, as in many small churches, wore other hats and carried out many other responsibilities, and being in the position that was in, privy to a lot of situations concerning the church. Excuse me. Now, when you're telling stories such as this, anonymity is, of course, an important factor because nobody wants to be held up for ridicule. And during one Sunday morning service, while the music minister was playing the piano, you could see the entire congregation out in front of him, as well as at the front door. At the end of the service, the front door opened and 2 very tall men with long black coats and stovepipe hats walked in. Now, it looked like they were from the 1920s. And the music minister wondered, was he the only one that was seeing these 2 men? Well, the 2 men walked all the way from the back of the church, up the outside aisle along the wall, all the way to the podium. And when they reached the podium, they evaporated into thin air. After service, walked outside, and the older minister's wife took him aside and asked if he had seen the 2 individuals. He said he didn't know what happened, and she proceeded to tell him that she had seen the same thing that he had seen. Years ago, the property the church sat on was once the location where local executions, hangings, and things like that had taken place. When found that out, the hair on the back of his neck stood up and certainly gave him an eerie feeling. You know, I grew up in a small country Baptist church, and I heard a lot of stories about odd happenings. Now, I didn't see anything myself at the church. I saw it at my grandmother's house. This next story comes from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The individual in question is a former Marine and a disabled veteran. And he said strange things happen at the woodpile. Throwing of walnuts against the house, and this individual, this disabled veteran, grew up in a low-income area of eastern North Carolina, Lumberton to be specific. Spent most of the childhood outside with his 2 brothers. Now, the family didn't have a lot of money, was hardworking, loving, taught respect for others, and instilled within the kids a respect for the paranormal, superstitious ideas, and respect for the local lores and urban legends. And as a child, this individual had his personal experiences with a ghost and the paranormal. But it was his close-up experience of what he called the swamp man that changed everything. He said his grandmother loved to eat squirrels. On several occasions, she had sent him, when he was between the ages of 8 and 10, along with a cousin out in the mornings, to get her a couple of four squirrels for lunch or dinner. And they'd go hunting. I always told her to watch out for the swamp man, not go into his area. Now, the swamp man's area was said to have started near a mound next to the Lumber River and stretched out to the marshes. One summer morning, she said, I want some squirrels, go get me some. And he said, sure, and left. The grandmother had listed his brothers and one of his cousins to help her pick butter beans in the garden, so on that day he was out in the woods by himself, hunting for squirrels on his own. Now, he had done that several times, and so it was nothing new for him. He took his 410 pump shotgun and started a trek across the tobacco fields to the tree line. On his walk, he could hear the sounds of the bugs and feel the heat even at 8 o'clock in the morning. And that summer it was so hot, it didn't rain much. Everything was just dry and dusty. Well, he said he got to the tree line where he could usually see squirrels, but there wasn't one in sight, and strangely enough, there was no sounds. Perfectly silent. That meant he had to go inside the tree line, and he knew he could find some squirrels down near the river, so he did that. And when he got to his spot, he sat down to wait, but just like at the tree line, there was nothing. No sound, no squirrel, no nothing. Well, with the lack of rain, the river was low, and it could easily be crossed, with the deepest part being only 3 or 4 feet deep. There was a rope swing on a tree at a favorite swimming hole, but with the water being so low due to the drought, they really couldn't use it safely. So he walked down to the bank, as it was easier traveling along the riverbank than it was in the woods. After a few minutes, he heard the sound of squirrels running in the trees, so he changed directions, heading up toward the woods and the sounds, but this time he saw something different. He could see what looked like a sandbar in the marsh. He was walking toward it. He could still hear the squirrels that were close to the sandbar, so he got in position ready to shoot. He saw the squirrels he had heard, and once they stopped moving, he shot. With 2 shots, he got 2 squirrels. They'd fallen down in the thick brush around the tree they'd been in. He moved to get them, but found it difficult, as one had fallen on top of the brush and the other through the brush, landing on the sandy floor underneath. So he sat his shotgun down and grabbed a stick to knock off the closest one. And after a few tries, he got him off the top of the bush, and the second was in a more difficult position, deep underneath the brush. He got on all fours and could see him, but he was about 20 yards deep inside the brush. He knew if he just crawled, he could get him, so it wasn't a big deal, and he started to crawl. Nearly immediately, he got a whiff of a very strong smell, an odor he would describe as smelling like a combination of mud and decomposing leaves. Well, he got about 5 yards into the brush, and then he could hear movement. First thought he was hearing was a wild pig, and knew if that was that, he needed to get his shotgun and get out of there. But as he listened, it sounded different, sounded heavier, and that smell was dominating everything. Got within a few yards of the squirrel and remember thinking, get this thing and get out of here. There was no sound except the noise he was making, and he stopped to look around and figure out his way to get out of the brush, and he looked back up at the squirrel and noticed something behind the brush moving. Next thing he knew, he saw a muddy, dark-skinned, hairy hand reaching out and grabbing a squirrel, and then it was gone. Well, he was shocked, of course, and knew he had to get out of there. He crawled out as fast as he could, grabbed a gun the moment he's out of the brush, and he stood up and turned to look back, and he saw a face. It wasn't human, but at the same time, it had human characteristics. Next thing he knew, he heard grunts and crunching as whatever this thing was eating the squirrel, raw. First, he couldn't move because his knees felt like jelly. When he's finally able to begin running, this thing, whatever it was, turned its head and looked at him, made another grunt and ran off at the same time he was running in the opposite direction back toward his grandmother's. As he ran, he saw a broom sticking out of the ground. He ran as hard and fast as he could to get to it, and that was the marker at the mound where he knew we weren't supposed to go past. Unfortunately, he had, and he'd encountered the swamp man. He had entered the swamp man's domain. Even though he knew there was nothing chasing him, he continued running all the way back home, and he got to his grandmother's. When he got back, she looked at him and laughed and said, "Well, there goes my dinner." Gave him a quick hug and told him to get some water and go help the others with the beans. On the walk to get the water, she told him he was lucky to have seen what he had, and he learned a hard lesson to be aware of his surroundings and respect everything in the woods and the swamps. There's in my grandmother's, there was a couple of areas that, though no one told me, I knew not to enter. One was a cave that went down very deep. And that's where the water for the farm came from. I heard some interesting stories, but I'm not going to relate them tonight. Well, this next story involves a lady who lived in not one but two haunted houses. We're going up the storyteller and her family lived in a house that had been built in the early 1900s. And even though the old house might seem creepy to most folks, they never felt threatened in this old house or never felt as if they were in harm's way. One day when she was 14 years old, she went up to her bedroom and noticed that there was a dollar bill sticking out of the wall. It was a paneled wall, and the paneling was placed together tightly, and this dollar bill is tightly stuck between two of the panels. She'd never seen it before, this dollar bill, and the strange thing about it, she could see the date. It was from 1920. Well, she went back downstairs and got her mother, and when they went upstairs together to look, the dollar bill was gone. Even though the mother never saw it, she believed her daughter. Well, the daughter's 50 years old now. When she and her husband bought their family's home 10 years ago, they bought one is also from the early 1900s, like the one she'd grown up in. There'd been numerous times while living in that house that she heard music out of nowhere. Big band era music, and oldest daughter also heard it from time to time. They never felt threatened when they heard the music and never been harmed. Once she was in the kitchen, she heard what sounded like phone static. Now, they had a traditional dial phone in their house, but their landline hadn't yet been installed yet. So she went to the phone and picked it up, and resting in the cradle. There was no way yet she could have heard the noise coming out of that phone, especially since the landline hadn't yet been activated. Another time at night, while her husband had gone off to work, she was lying in bed in her downstairs bedroom. All three of the girls were sleeping upstairs. Looked out her bedroom door and saw a shadow of a girl on the wall in the living room. She thought it was her youngest daughter, and she was getting ready to come into her room and get in bed with her. When she didn't come, she went into the living room to check on her, and the shadow had vanished. Went upstairs and found that all three of her girls were in bed sleeping. Well, for some reason, her husband never experienced anything in the house, and all activity stopped about a year after they moved in. She decided the ghosts were happy to live with them, so they scared the ghost and they left. Well, there was another individual who never thought she was going to live in a haunted house till she wound up doing it. He started out reading a lot about the paranormal. In fact, she's so fascinated she can't put books down. She's heard of a lot of other people living in haunted houses and watched a lot of videos on the topic. I always found herself saying that never happened to me. Well, she discovered that it did. While in her house, there have been times it felt like something had touched her, tugged on her hair, moved an object while she was not looking, and even made items fall off the kitchen counter. When these things would happen, she'd say, "Stop touching me," or "Cut that out," or simply refuse to think about it. It isn't until her cat started acting out, obviously seeing things that were there that she couldn't. Things she wanted to believe weren't real. Well, the cat started indicating she was seeing things she couldn't by sitting on her back legs, looking into a bedroom that didn't have lights on. She'd sit in that position for about 5 minutes, looking into the bedroom like something was moving around in there. The woman didn't think as much about it as she should have, perhaps, because the cat was a very jumpy cat. But shortly she was going to be convinced. A couple of months after the cat started seeing these things, the Roku would turn on without anybody touching the remote. After a few times of that happening, simply coming on by itself, it began beeping as if somebody was surfing the channels. One evening in particular, when the Roku kept turning on, she'd turn it off and it'd come right back on. She gave up after 3 times of this happening and left it alone for that evening. When she woke up the next morning, the Roku was back on, but in screensaver mode. Showed she turned it off. 3 days after that, she was sitting in the house and all was quiet, and suddenly the Roku popped back on. A new channel started downloading, and a home improvement show came on. The show paused so the information about the show could be read, and then it started back up. She didn't even have the remote near her. She got the remote to check out the new downloads made on Roku. Only one channel downloaded. The channel had been playing the home improvement show and was also plays cooking shows. Ever since this happened, it hadn't stopped. The Roku would come on several times each week, and always after 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, the woman believes now she does have a ghost in her house. She's not scared. It hasn't caused harm to anybody or anything. She thinks the ghost is her father, who died 3 years before, or at least, or maybe a very close high school friend who was killed 6 years ago. It's interesting to note that this isn't the only individual I've heard talk about electronic TVs doing strange things. Well, here's an interesting question for you. Are the houses haunted, or are we? A lot of folks believe they live in haunted houses. Perhaps many people do. But this individual found through personal experience, some people act like a magnet for all things paranormal. Now, didn't want to go as far as to say maybe these people are haunted, because that might be too bold a statement. It's not that they're possessed, not even close. But there seem to be people, entities on the other side of the veil can see or hear them. So these are the people whom the others reveal themselves to. There's a lot of stories that I heard growing up, especially since I've been writing books and doing shows about the paranormal. Well, that may well be possible. Well, this next story involves 2 of my favorite topics: UFOs and Bigfoot. Well, when the storyteller was in the 8th grade, their grandparents and they were driving home from Bangor, Maine. As they were driving, he looked out the window and saw a huge rectangular-shaped object spinning with 2 sets of lights on each end. It was low down to the ground. Next day, he told the friends, and surprise, surprise, they didn't believe him. But that didn't bother him. Next strange experience happened 2 or 3 years later. Walking to school one day, and as he was walking, he noticed these weird tracks in the snow. Bigger than a human's tracks, but not as big as a full-grown Bigfoot. Most likely they belong to what you might call a juvenile or teenage Bigfoot. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a photo because this was Maine. It was where it was cold during the night and warm in the morning, so the thaw always washed away the slush. There'd been 2 prints. One was of a regular flat foot and looked like the toes didn't make it to the ground all the way, so the toes looked like U's. Again, this was in Maine, where it had been too cold for any sane person to be walking around barefoot. And there were no reports in the news, no word of mouth of any missing person or strange sightings. So he had no idea who or what might have made the tracks. The next strange experience the storyteller encountered happened about that same time, maybe a year later. Sitting at home one day, minding his own business, he heard very clearly what sounded like the sound of a bull getting ready to charge from outside. Well, you might think to yourself, you live in Maine, they have farms. But the nearest farm was a mile or so away, and they had no bulls at that farm. And Bigfoot, of course, likes to imitate animals. Some say it's the wind, but he'll say he's never heard the wind make a sound like that. So certainly in rural communities, you're more likely to encounter strange occurrences, such as Bigfoot. Well, this next story came from a young lady named Amanda. She has a lot of stories she could tell about things that had happened to them that were weird, but she's just going to talk about one of her experiences. She and her husband got married in 2001. Shortly after that, they moved from a one-bedroom flat into a three-bedroom old creepy house. One of those that sits on the edge of the street with no front yard. In fact, it was one of the first to be built in the town she came from. A few months after moving in, she and her husband were sleeping one night, and about 3 a.m, she saw a white cat coming in from the bathroom window. Now, the bathroom connected with their room, and the cat ran into the room, went next to her husband's side of the bed, and a second later, a black cat ran out of the same window. And as strange as it sounded, was the fact that at that moment, she and her husband both woke up asking the same question: did you see the cats? Well, they were both asleep, but they both saw the same thing in their sleep. He got up looking for the white cat, but still the windows and doors were closed. There were no cats in sight. That was the beginning of the weird happenings. Of course, at the time, they didn't realize it was going to only be the beginning. Needless to say, the next morning she put open Bibles all over the house, which did keep things away for sure. Months later, they found out that the cleaner they had was a witch doctor called a Sangoma in South Africa, where they live. She was shortly thereafter fired. Well, they had a kid with what they called a gift, or some call it a curse, and that's the ability to see spirits. About 10 years ago, they moved into a very big house belonging to some of their family, so the rent was cheap. And the kids started seeing things: shadows, mist, smells, flashes of light, things like that. Nothing ever caused any harm. One night, she saw a black mist floating on the TV room ceiling. Of course, that freaked out the mother. She was thinking of what could have caused that, and then she took an old copper tray they'd received from their sister-in-law a few years before out of the place. She kept it just in case she might need it someday, even though it wasn't her style, hanging such things on a wall. But for some reason, she took it out and hung it in the kitchen next to the TV room where the sister had given it to her. And then when her daughter saw the black mist, she remembered that her sister-in-law lived on a property where a Satan worshiper lived. She believes that physical items, such as items made of copper, can hold a lot of energy. She moved that item from the house and everything stopped. Might be coincidence. Might not be. Well, this next story, 2016, her mother got sick suddenly, and the doctor didn't seem to find the right way to treat her, so within a month, she just died in her sleep with no warning. But this story begins 5 days prior to the mother's death, when she saw an image that reminded her of an angel, though she knows it was just the sun shining through behind a lady walking down the street. Weirdly enough, this lady was walking past the funeral home. Next day, her stepsister sent her a photo of a friend of hers who'd dropped a bag of sugar, and behold, it formed a clear image of an angel, just like the ones you put on a Christmas tree. They all laughed about it, of course. It was just past 5 that evening, she came home, and as they drove into the yard, she saw a woman standing in her mother's garden under a tree. She was a young woman with light blonde and red hair, and for some reason she was sure she knew the woman. But almost immediately, the woman was gone. Didn't freak her out, because in this house we see a lot of things that are unexplainable, she said. Well, her mother died on a Sunday. It visited her that morning, but knowing nothing new, they'd gone home. Took an afternoon nap because emotionally they were drained. They were tired of crying and worrying. Next parts, she woke up at 5 minutes after 4 and sat up on the side of the bed and gave the deepest sigh she'd ever given in her life. The only word that escaped her mouth was "ma," meaning mother, and the calmest feeling came over her with the knowledge she's okay. Days later, her sister told us she also was napping, and her oldest woke up saying she saw Uma, or grandma. 2 hours after they woke up, they got the call. The storyteller was shocked to the core, and her mother died 5 minutes after 4. She'd come to say goodbye. Now the creepiest part of the story. Next day, the uncle sent a photo of her mother when she was in her 30s. Spitting image of the woman that the storyteller saw in her garden. Same hair, same dress. That's why she thought she knew the woman. Well, there's a lot of stories from not only South Africa, where we are listened to, but from a lot of other countries in the world. And on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk about more stories that are strange. Until then, Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.